November is usually a pretty packed month in terms of film releases, and this is clearly apparent. Every year around the holiday season, studios pack the box office full of big budget and awards-darling slates, trying to capitalize off of the crowd levels at movie theaters and broaching their releases to a wide demographic. As a film critic, this is an exciting, yet busy time of the year for sure, as November and December usually hold some of the most exciting prospects in terms of movie releases for the entire year, while it can also be difficult to stay afloat in terms of review coverage within that time frame as well. With that said, I want to begin this review by saying if you want to stay on top of all of my review coverage for the next few months in terms of movie releases, don't forget to click that subscribe button and turn on push notifications down below. And I'd say that the winter movie-going season is going to kick off especially this weekend with the release of Wicked for Good, which is Jon M's follow-up to last year's first entry. If you recall last November, there was a particular frenzy that surrounded this movie, and for good reason. Wicked is a vast and expansive property full of a dedicated musical theater fan base, and there's a reason it's one of the most consistently popular and well-attended touring musicals in the entire US. And if you recall from my review of the first entry last year, although I didn't walk into the film explicitly a fan of the musical or have high hopes for it, I actually left pleasantly surprised at what Chu and his team had accomplished there. Granted, the first Wicked movie is not a perfect movie in any right, as weird stylistic, directorial, and thematic choices make apparent. But it was nevertheless a wholly spirited and unique piece of musical cinema that managed to pack a punch, due in part to Cynthia, Erivo, and Ariana Grande's core performances as Elphaba and Glinda. And it seems that Wicked for Good will need to pack that same punch here as well. The film has already given itself a variety of difficult tasks to pull off with ease, chief among them ensuring that the conclusion of the series feels resonant and impactful for all involved, allowing new audiences who haven't seen the first film to enjoy this one for what it is, and also managing to stick a landing as an overall product when you put the two films back to back together. Because as you may know, the first Wicked movie covered Act 1 of the musical, and Wicked for Good covers Act 2. However, Wicked for Good already has an immensely more difficult job right outside of the gate, and this is for the simple fact that Act 2 of the musical pales in comparison to Act 1. I actually saw the stage musical version of Wicked when it toured to my city like several years ago, and one distinct point I honed in on about the halfway point of the second act of that show is that the first act is such an excellent job of immersing me into this world and setting up complex character development and thematic ideas. In the second act, just didn't manage to live up to par with that same quality. For this same reason, even if I'm approaching Wicked for Good excited about the overall quality of the film, since Jon M happily proved me wrong last year, to say that I have high hopes overall for this entry would be an understatement. Because a film solely concerning the events of the second act of the musical doesn't seem like it's going to be able to stand alone on its own regard. With so much pressure placed upon the execution of this film by fans, critics, and audiences alike, it seems that Wicked for Good is the movie everyone is talking about currently. And I'm here to assess whether that central conversation is exactly needed or not due to the quality of the overall film. So earlier tonight, I picked up my finest Wicked-themed attire, which is a sweatshirt I got as an FYC package last award season that I've never worn before. I gathered some of my closest friends who are similarly interested and excited to see the movie, and I went to my local theater to check out an early screening of the film. To say the energy within this theater was anything but electric is an understatement. It was the most crowded I've seen my local multiplex theater in some time. And as a film critic, it was somewhat inspiring to see that maybe people do in fact care about going out to the theater to support movie-going efforts. People were decked out everywhere in pink and green attire, and as we took our seats inside of the auditorium, the excitement in the air was palpable. It was hard not to feel optimistic about what was about to occur. And as the Universal logo appeared on screen, I truly settled in to experience whatever it was I was about to, hopeful that Jon M would once again prove me wrong like he did last year. But when I walked out of the film, to say that I was slightly disappointed would be quite an apt description. As I stumbled out of the auditorium 2 hours later with my friends in tow, my emotions were all out of balance and for good reason. And this is because the shocking truth about a film like Wicked for Good is that it's not a bad movie, but it's not a good one either. In creating the definitive conclusion to the story and painting the ending finale to a property that so many people hold near and dear to their hearts, it seems that the end result has faltered right before the slam dunk it needed to solidify this as a prime example within the movie musical genre. Alas, it seems that the most unfortunate truth of Wicked for Good is that no matter how much it wants to tout itself as a profound and poignant conclusion, the result is actually quite muted in terms of reality. Wicked for Good picks up shortly where the events of the first film left off, almost as if the year-long wait between installments was a built-in intermission within the show environment. As was established within the last film, Elphaba Throp, played by Cynthia Erivo, has been banished to the outlands of Oz, labeled by the residents of the land as the Wicked Witch of the West. As Elphaba fights to ensure freedom and prosperity for animals within all the land, Glinda the Good, played by Ariana Grande, continues to be a pawn in the games of Madame Morrible, played by Michelle Yeoh, Erivo, and the wizard played by Jeff Goldblum. As the stakes and the fight between the residents of the land grow more intense by the minute, both Elphaba and Glinda will have to look inside themselves in order to reconcile change within the land and ensure an Oz that is worth living in for everyone. As I mentioned within the beginning of my review, Wicked for Good is essentially the Act 2 showcase for this story. Now, when a single property is split up into multiple cinematic parts, I'm usually very skeptical of this as a film critic, as I often wonder why this case or change was even made in the first place. This thought process has been present ever since I first saw Peter Jackson's bizarre Frankenstein-like reimagining of the Hobbit trilogy, in which he took one specific book and made it 3 distinct movies. In a similar vein, the Wicked films are essentially taking a 2.5-hour stage play and stretching the content into 5.5 to 6 hours of cinematic spectacle, which is a drastic time difference between the two. Yet while the content itself is fine within the confines of a shorter stage play or musical, one of my major questions and qualms in relation to the material here is whether the film is able to stand apart and make a case as to why these additions are needed. And ultimately, and strangely enough, Wicked for Good is a film that advocates for both sides of this argument with ease, as some of the choices and changes here are quite admirable and actually fit within the confines of this property perfectly, while others seem almost baffling in execution and leave audiences scratching their heads and wondering, why exactly did that happen? If we're talking about the Wicked films, we of course have to start off discussing the core duo that drives so much of the dramatic intensity and emotion within this story, which is in the roles of Elphaba and Glinda respectively. With this in mind, I want to again highlight how great of a job both Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande both do within these roles. Their casting is pitch perfect, allowing each performer to disappear into their roles with ease, and showcasing a raw dramatic strength that we don't often see from performances of this caliber. I could not imagine any other performers or actors taking up these roles, and with this in mind, it has to be commended how well cast they are overall. Yet, although I enjoyed the casting of them overall, their performances themselves are a different discussion entirely. Cynthia Erivo clearly feels like the standout here, portraying Elphaba as deeply sympathetic yet simultaneously flawed as well, which allows audiences to truly feel for her and root for her every step of the way. Erivo's chemistry with Grande is also excellent here, making for quite poignant flourishes within their dynamic here that pack a definitive punch by the time the credits roll. Yet, strange as it may seem, Erivo's Elphaba in this film almost seems sidelined in a sense within her role in the story here, as the movie takes a surprising amount of focus to the characters surrounding her, and while this is still somewhat interesting, it's disappointing to see how little Erivo or Elphaba has to work with here in the overall grand scheme of things. Part of this narrative focus is shifted to Ariana Grande's Glinda, who actually finally clicked as a character for me this time around and managed to stand apart within this film overall. If you'll recall my review for the first entry, one of my main points of contention was how I disliked Grande's spin on the role, as it felt overtly showy and vibrant without holding a semblance of dramatic weight or nuance underneath. Yet within this entry, it's clear that Grande has finally managed to strike a careful balance between comedic and nuanced within this character, and her role within the story feels more fleshed out as a result. Ultimately, however, I struggle to understand many of the claims by her passionate fanbase of her being one of the quote greatest performances of the year, and seeing as how they want to blatantly attack anyone within the critical circle who disagrees otherwise, it's concerning to say the least. And I ultimately can't help but feel like I got a solid and nuanced arc for Glinda from an emotional standpoint, but it seems that Elphaba's core character journey here was almost delegated to the background, which is deeply unfortunate considering the story needs both parts and performances to even work. Yet even surrounding the core duo themselves, we have a plethora of great performers who reprise their roles from the first entry with so much charm and nuance again this time around. I continue to love Jonathan Bailey's casting as Prince Fiero, and this act of the story really gives him the chance to shine dramatically within his core relationships with Elphaba and Glinda respectively. Jeff Goldblum, as always, is a delight to watch as the wizard himself, playing the part with the gusto and vibrancy we know and love from him, but also restraining himself in the more dramatic and grounded moments of the story as well. It also has to be mentioned that Jon M's direction here is nothing short of sheer movie-going magic, and this much is clearly apparent. One of the biggest shortcomings with most recent movie musicals is how the sense of stage presence is lost entirely, as if the sets and locations no longer feel like stage choreography pieces, and rather feel like meaningless green screens with no sense of realism. Yet Chu masterfully combines the two, allowing the characters to interact with the sets, while also expanding the world via CGI effects to an intense degree. This element, combined with the way the movement is blocked and the choreography is locked down, makes us feel directly like a stage musical production in cinematic form, and that is something that is sadly lost within most modern movie musicals nowadays. Regardless of what issues that Wicked for Good has from a storytelling or thematic place, which we'll get into shortly, it cannot be denied that Jon M is clearly the best working filmmaker within the musical space nowadays. days. And if there's any future theatrical production that he wants to bring to the big screen, I'll be there day one to support it. And ultimately, seeing that this is the definitive conclusion of the story of Wicked, I'm sure most prospective audiences will want to know whether the film sticks to the landing in terms of wrapping up these character arcs in an emotionally satisfying and resonant way. After all, the relationship between Glinda and Elphaba is the core of why Wicked as a story and musical feels profound and nuanced with ease. It is quite possibly the most important element of this entry overall. If that doesn't work, this movie probably wouldn't work either. And I am pleased to report that the finale of this film is not only deeply moving and motivated, but also feels earned in every sense of the word. There is not one single moment in this portion of the film that feels manipulative or superficial from an emotional standpoint. And on that level, Wicked for Good surely soars in these moments. However, outside of the final 30 minutes, which are far and away the best moments of this film, we now have to unfortunately look at the rest of the film leading up to this final act, which is not great, to put it lightly. Most of the issues and concerns I had in relation to the second act being a standalone entry were in fact present here, unfortunately, which feels deeply disappointing and lackluster. I famously dislike the second act of the musical as mentioned, and feel it's where most of the story and thematic problems of Wicked truly show themselves, and this could not be more apparent as this film in particular progresses along. I don't quite understand what it was about this film in particular, but when comparing the sheer spectacle of the first film to this entry, everything here, from the choreography to the sets to the musical numbers themselves, just feels so muted and subdued in comparison. The energy just feels lower overall, and nothing feels as vibrant or intensified as the first in so many areas. So much of the character development between Glinda and Elphaba especially feels sidelined, as if the main focus of the story is no longer there and is instead devoted to vastly different areas of the film that don't feel as nuanced or necessary to the overall stakes of such a story overall. I also didn't find that the cinematography was as refined as it needed to be to truly stand apart. So much of this film just feels so stock and grossly digital, and it's especially apparent when viewing Chu's phenomenal direction and practical sets through this distorted lens. And I was ultimately not as enamored with Michelle Yeoh's performance as Madame Morrible here, who is a pretty key character involved in the story of Elphaba and Glinda, who has ulterior motives for each. It's not that Yeoh is not a talented actress, as is clearly evidenced otherwise in her great performance in Everything Everywhere All at Once from a few years ago. Rather, the material here within the second act of the story really constrains her ability to showcase nuance. And there are several distinct choices made on behalf of this character that don't really stick a landing in terms of impact for audiences overall. Yet, perhaps the worst element of Wicked for Good, and the aspect that really tanks the film as a standalone project in comparison, is just how unfinished it all feels. This is blatantly and unabashedly half of a movie, much like the first one. But whereas the first one was pulled off in a way that felt somewhat conclusive and definitive, this portion of the story feels jarring as a result, never breaking up its pacing. And on that level, a definitive question that has to be asked in regards to Wicked for Good as a film is, did this story really need to be told over two different movies? Ultimately, this is going to be a question that has many different responses to it, but from a critical and analytical wavelength, I would have to say that unfortunately do not see the appeal for this decision overall. The film feels discordant as a result, sticking out in such an awkward way and never investing enough into the material to make audiences care about this entry. On that level, it makes me wonder whether I'll be able to appreciate this film when I'm able to pair these both back to back and watch them in one sitting together. But if you're already starting to discuss how that might make the experience overall better, you know you've already failed at making a standalone entry intriguing or motivated enough to stand apart. At its core, Wicked for Good is a film that sets out to deliver a definitive conclusion to the story of Elphaba and Glinda. And most audiences and fans of the musical might be approaching this film expecting just that. And on that level, some of you might be asking right now, even if the film is subpar in several areas, does it at least wrap up the story in a meaningful way? And ultimately, the answer is yes. The ending portion of this film is among one of the most emotionally and thematically profound conclusions I've seen within a film all calendar year alone. And on that level, it's sure to delight and please fans everywhere. Yet it's the journey to get to this resonant ending that might cause audiences to stumble along the way. And much like the fictional yellow brick road they build within the film, the footing is uneven and messy in portions. Like sure, you'll eventually get to the destination you need to, but at what cost? That's why I'm giving Wicked for Good a 3 out of 5 stars. Wicked for Good releases in theaters this Friday. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching this review on my channel. If you're new around here and you like the content you see, don't forget to click that subscribe button down below, like the video, and turn on push notifications. Also, leave comment suggestions down below for future video, essay, and review topics. With that being said, until next time, this is Mitchell signing off. Peace out.